Time for another winning edition of the Kaufman Corner podcast. With you, as always, the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli. I am Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB. Thanks for joining us as the Royals bombing the Cincinnati Reds. We'll talk about that. Our playoff optimism meter. The Witt Minute, Dairon Blanco. Where did this guy come from? Lucas Erceg continues to be absolutely dominant. Brady Singer bounces back. And guess what? Randy's got a speech for us all tonight. That's right. He's going to admit he was wrong? I don't know. We'll find out. It's next on the Kaufman Corner podcast.
This is the Kaufman Corner podcast, the most in-depth analysis of the Kansas City Royals, breaking down the Royals like no one else can. Kaufman Corner is hosted by Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro. Rany is a co-founder of Baseball Prospectus, author of Rany on the Royals, and former columnist for Grantland, The Ringer, and The Athletic. Soren is the award-winning afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Kaufman Corner is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here are your hosts, Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro.
Thank you very much, Curtis. We have much to get to here today, Randy, as the Royals just keep on winning. The playoff optimism meter, we usually like to start right there. After dominating the Reds, Curtis Siebold gave me a couple of stats I'm going to fire out as to just how dominant this series was. Where do we sit? Feeling pretty good, or does the gauntlet that lies ahead still have you questioning things?
Well, the gauntlet ahead certainly still has me questioning things, but this weekend does sort of feel like a tipping point. To me, I mean, the week did not start well. Let's not forget. It started with the Royals looking like they usually do in Minnesota, which is bad, and in danger of getting swept and feeling like this is a paper tiger that when they go up against actual contenders, just can't hang. But then Cole Reagans played the part of the stopper, on Wednesday and kept the Royals from being swept in the series. And that's the sort of thing, when you think of, the difference between a contender and a bad team is, the contenders always go 2-1. No, sometimes a contender turns 0-3 into 1-2, and that's fine. You've got to sneak out your wins somewhere, especially on the road against another contender. But I don't think any of us were prepared for for the beatdown we saw in Cincinnati. I guess football season's here, Soren, because Kansas City is boat racing Cincinnati.
Yeah.
I mean, historic beatdown, 28-3. They outscored the Reds, 3 blowout wins in a row. And I imagine these might be the numbers Curtis shared with you, but the Royals outscored their opponents by 25 runs in a series. I believe that's only happened once in the history of the team, according to my numbers. Maybe you have different ones. In 1999, the Royals outscored the Oakland A's in Kansas City. I believe it was 30. I can do math here. 34-7.
Yes.
Now
ones.
Yeah. Now the problem is that series that was in mid-May, and it elevated the Royals to 21-18 on the season in 1999. The Royals immediately lost 14 of their next 16 games to fall to 23-32, which is just a reminder that momentum is a myth, that things can change on a dime. That one good series is just one good series. But the difference is it's not mid-August. It's not mid-May. It's mid-August. Like, the Royals have been doing this all season long. Their run differential for the season, Soren, right now is plus 107. They've outscored their opponents by 107 runs on the year. Do you know the last time the Royals had a run differential of 107 at any point in any season?
1989?
Nope. Go back farther.
Farther, really? 79?
Close. The end of the 1980 season. The Royals, I believe, were plus 115. They actually got up higher. They had a bad September after they had already clinch the division. The Royals have not been this far, above the equivalent of 500 for run differential. They've not had a run differential this high in 44 years. In 2015, they topped out at plus 103. That was there for one day. They were over 100 on run differential. It was the only day since 1980 they've been over 100. And they broke that today. They were plus 25 just for this series, obviously. So plus 107. They've won 3 pennants and 2 World Series without ever having a run differential this high for even one day in any season. So at some point, and maybe that point was this weekend. At some point, you just have to put aside the fact that the Royals lost 106 games last year and just say, look, the Reds are not a bad team. They are below 500, but they actually had a positive run differential. I think the run differential coming into the series was plus 55. The Royals were at plus 82 3 days ago. And the games were in Cincinnati. This is a road series against a good, not great, but a good team. And the Royals obliterated them without Cole Reagans or Seth Lugo. They gave up 1 run in 3 consecutive games as their starting pitching, from their number 3, 4, and 5 starters. Their starting pitching just continues to be the best part of this team. I don't want to get too crazy with my optimism meter, but I can't just ignore the facts either. Let me put it this way. So I got a text from our good friend Joe Sheehan today, the true bellwether of Royals pessimism. Here's one of the lines in here. I'm close to giving in. Every time I think they're going to fade, they don't. Like in the playoffs, it eventually doesn't matter how good you are, but how well you play. That's Joe Sheehan.
Yeah.
So I'm putting my optimism meter at 7. And Fangraphs agrees with me because as of right now, their odds of making the playoffs are at 71%. So 7, I believe, is the high point of the season. I can't go any higher than that until they start getting through this really tough stretch of games and showing that they won't collapse. But it's mid-August and they're 14 games over 500 and they've got a 3.5 game lead, I think, on a last playoff spot.
Yes.
At some point we just have to start thinking this team is going to at least be in it till the very end, whether they make it or not.
So I'm putting you down for what?
7.
7.
A full 7, round number. I believe that's my high point of the year. You could check, but I'm pretty sure that's as high as it's been.
It is. I can't. I'm going to hold on to 5 one more time.
Wow.
Because I think you are getting a little bit caught up in the euphoria. And the run differential is great, but they kind of do this thing where, you also are what your record says you are, right? We've had a number of people mention the Pythagorean record. The Royals should be in first place, when you do the run differential, but it still is about winning the games. And they, for whatever reason, I think you forgot real quick how rough the week did start. How much they looked outclassed by Minnesota, how much the bullpen is still very fragile, right? And so I think we feel good when they beat up the bad teams, which I agree with you. The Reds aren't horrible, but they're not a good team, and they're not going to the playoffs, right? They're a team that's in building. And it's amazing because the Reds looked like they were way down the road from the Royals, right? And how things are going, and now they put them in the back. I'm going to hold on to the 5 until I see them, because I still just, when I look at that stretch, all right, and I know I've been pointing towards it for over a month now, and when you just go through the games, they don't play well against these teams. The 2 losses in Minnesota were beatdowns, 8-3 and 13-3, right? And it felt ugly, and they're about ready to start running with Philadelphia, Cleveland, Houston, Minnesota, New York, Yankees, by the way, and then even a Pirates team that's not that bad. So, that is going to be a tough stretch, and it's a lot of the stretch. And so, I listen. I will bounce it up if they can go beat up on the Angels and handle that business. Then if they go 3-0, then maybe they even get another game up on the Red Sox, and maybe they've got the cushion they need for me to go, okay, I'm on board. They can definitely do it. At a 5, I'm putting it at 50-50. But this stretch, to me just feels kind of, 8-12. The 20 games, I think that's still looming out there. And I don't know what we've seen here of late with how they played against Boston, St. Louis, and Minnesota, where they were 3-5. I don't know. That part is just looming to where if they do that 3-5, 3-5, 3-5, and then all of a sudden that stretch gets even worse, right? Then we're talking about like 6-14 type of stretch. And so that's what concerns me. So listen, I'm not going to be, unless they go 3-0 against the Angels, but then we'll be into the Phillies, coming up before we talk again. And so we'll already have a feel of that. And if that goes south early, I'm not going to be on board. But I'm close. I want to give it more, but I don't know why I would just turn my back on what it is. Listen, that stretch is going to be hell on wheels, and they're still not playing well against top teams.
Look, I agree that these games are coming up are very important, and some skepticism is warranted. I'm a little surprised you get a 4-2 week. You talk about what matters, wins and losses are what ultimately matter. 4-2 is 4-2, and it doesn't matter if they beat up on the bad teams and struggle against good teams, or play both competitively. A win is a win. The problem with losing 2 out of 3 of the Twins is simply that the Twins picked up a game on them. The Twins have the tiebreaker on them for the season. But even with that, I mean, this is how quickly things can change. They came though after those first 2 games. I would not have expected that when we talk tonight, the Royals are 1 game behind the Twins in the standings. They're 3.5 behind the Guardians, who just got swept. Like, they just picked up 3. They were 6.5 back against on Cleveland, and they just made up half that deficit in 3 days. All right. I mean, Fangraphs has the Guardians at just 55% to win the division now. Like, this is a 3-team race for the division, let alone a playoff spot. So I totally understand some skepticism is warranted, but I'm a little surprised you haven't moved the needle at all. But I think, like you said, I have a feeling the dam will break if they continue to play well, even as they hit this monster stretch here in the next.
And even if they just, like I said, if they take 3 from the Angels, I mean, like it is the formula, right? The formula is to beat up on the bad teams and just play 500 against the good teams. That is the formula for all playoff teams. It's what they all do, right? In maybe somebody's 4 or 5 over against the good teams, but nobody just beats the hell out of the really good teams. It just doesn't happen, right? So they're doing the formula that the way it needs to be done, and I do appreciate it. And I do think that they are. I like the way Joe put it. Playing well. I do think that they're a good defensive team. They got an excellent, catcher, behind the dish, and even when they move the other pieces around, they're still a pretty damn good defensive team. And that's what we started, I remember Danny Clinkscale coined the term greasy wins, right? The Royals had greasy wins. And it was because we hadn't seen good baseball in so long that when somebody else came in and played bad baseball, we felt bad. Well, come on. That's what we do. That doesn't really count. No, that really part of baseball is just not beating yourself.
Right. Just
go out there and stay in the game. And I do think that they are playing quality baseball and they don't beat themselves. But don't you think, like, I can't get all excited because, Urseg was ready to go today. He's not going to be ready to go tomorrow, right? And if they lose that game, we're going to be like, well, the bullpen sucks, right? If they go to MacArthur or whatever, what have you, then everyone's going to be doom and gloom about where the bullpen is. So I think the issues, I just think, listen, at 5, I'm not saying they're not going to make it. I think it's just up in the air. Where I would budge and maybe go to like 5.5 is when are it's becoming clear, like you've said, the Red Sox aren't just going to suddenly go, right? They don't seem to be ready to take off. And the longer they just sit there being nothing, the more likely that, like you've said a couple of times, games are running out.
Right. So a couple things there. One is, look, so you're basically saying, if they go out and sweep the Angels, you'll feel a lot better. Well, I think we have to remind ourselves that the standards for making the playoffs just aren't what they used to be with 6 teams making the playoffs. Let's say that the Royals take 2 out of 3 from the Angels and they lose 2 out of 3 to the Phillies. Doesn't sound good, 3-3 week. But you know what? 500 at this point is if they go 500 the rest of the season, that's basically what Fangraphs is projecting them to do. They are 7 full games above 500 right now. Fangraphs projects them to, on average, win 88 games, to play exactly 500 the rest of the season, and still has them at better than 50-50 to make the playoffs. The Royals, remember, the Royals started 34-19. And I think at that time, I brought up the example of this 1976 Royals, who got off to a really hot start and then basically played 500 or I think below 500 the rest of the way and held on for their first playoff spot. Since going 34-19 to start the year, the Royals are under 500. They are 35-36 in their last 71 games, and they're still in position to make the playoffs. When 6 teams make the playoffs, that's what you need. You need one really hot stretch for about 6 weeks, and then just hold on for dear life and play 500. And to be fair, 500 for 3 months or the last 2.5 months, 71 games, for a team that lost 106 games last year is still a heck of an accomplishment. Like, I do not denigrate going 500, but the point is 500 is okay. We're hoping that they'll play better. 500 would make me nervous if that's all they do the rest of the season. But if they go 500 during this difficult stretch, so between the, after this Angels series, it's what, a 20-game gauntlet. If they go 10-10 against, in order, the Phillies, the Guardians, the Astros, the Guardians again, the Twins, and the Yankees, I mean, I'd sign up for that in a heartbeat. I might even take 9-11 because that's the hardest part of your schedule. And you don't have to play, exactly 500 against good teams. If you play 450 ball, because some of those good teams are the number 1 seeds and some of them are the number 6 seeds, and you can play 580 ball against everyone else, you're probably in the playoffs. So I think, I just want to remind everybody, our standards are lower than even the last time the Royals were in the playoffs in 2015, because instead of 5 playoff teams, now there are 6. So that's the one thing. The other thing, because you brought it up just with the way Lucas Erceg, he may not be available tomorrow. I do want to give a shout out to Petro for the way he used Erceg, because everybody knows he's our best reliever. Everybody expects him to use him as a closer. And yet, what did he do? Bases loaded, 1 out, 7th inning. Quintero, like this is the game today. Erceg is our closer in quotation marks, but modern day closers doesn't mean you save him for the 9th inning or even the 8th inning. I was impressed that he brought him in the 7th inning, understanding the game was on the line.
Yeah, but he did that a couple of weeks ago, and everybody was mad because you know why? It didn't work out because the other guys didn't get anybody else out.
Well, I wasn't mad. I'm just saying. I'm glad that he didn't listen to what everybody. If everybody's mad, I'm glad he stuck with his gut there, because again, Ellie De La Cruz and I can't remember, was it Spencer Steer? They're number 2 and number 3 hitters in the Reds lineup. The bases loaded, 1 out. The game is on the line right there and then. And it works out because, maybe there would have chanced somebody else would have blown it in the 9th, but the Royals had an opportunity to score 4 runs in the 9th inning and make it a moot point. So, again, I think the way he's used Erceg, where he's using him as a stopper, an old 70s style stopper, where it's not, the point isn't about the save. The point is about getting outs in clutch situations whenever that occurs. And then as soon as, the crisis is over, he led pitch the 8th. The Royals obviously scored 4 in the 9th and didn't need him anymore. And he took him out. He'll probably not be available tomorrow, but he'll be available Tuesday. Hopefully tomorrow, Bubic will be available. We know this. The Royals need one more good reliever to step up. And if that happens, I feel much, much better about the rest of the season. But for now, the Royals were in danger of letting this one slip away, and they had to go to their one stopper, the one proven guy who can do this over and over again. And they did, and it worked. So shout out to Q for the way he handled him today. Yeah,
and the other thing is, like, a team like Seattle has 6 games left with the A's, right? Like, you start looking at the schedules and going, okay, where are people going to do? They've got a bunch left with the Rangers. I mean, just the AL West. I mean, you can just look at the AL West schedules to where I think those teams that's the only thing. It's not about the Royals for me. They're good enough to get there. It's just about, will somebody else get hot down the stretch off an easier schedule and catch them? And it's got to come from either Boston or it's probably, and somebody said this in the comment room, said that they're more, I think it was Cotman or was it Cameron, said, I'm more worried about like the Mariners. Like, to me, the Mariners and Astros beating up on the West, both of those teams going by them, one winning the division, of course, and the other one stealing the wild card. That would be more my concern. Right. So, but I come back to you are right. We are getting down on games where if they're going to do it, they got to do it. And
the Mariners are 3 games over 500. I mean, they are like, that puts them 5.5 back. 5.5 is that, yes, it's possible, but like that's the whole point. You've built such a buffer now that even if they get hot, And if they get hot, chances are they're going to have some of those games against the Astros and bring the Astros down. Like, we can afford one of those teams to pass us, just not both.
They don't have the Astros left.
They're not the Mariners and Astros are.
Oh, no. I'm wrong. Hang on. I needed to click the month. September 23rd to the 25th, they've got a 3 game.
I mean, they have 3 games. Obviously, anytime we see contenders playing each other is a good thing, right? So, and when there are so many teams that are still, at least theoretically in it. I mean, look, the Guardians a month ago we had already kind of put them in the, in the guaranteed column, but suddenly now they're very much, vulnerable of missing the playoffs entirely. So now, if the Guardians, I don't know, play the Astros or Mariners, and the Mariners sweep them or whatever, yeah, it's good for Seattle, bad for Cleveland. That might even be better for us. So, if the Royals just play 500 or like 1 or 2 games above 500 the rest of the way, if they play 2 games above 500 the rest of the way, that's 90 wins. They're probably in.
Yeah, no, I think 90 will get them there. We've had a couple of people. What do we think the number is? I think 90 will get you there. I think 89 probably will get you there. I think 88 maybe gets you there.
At 88 or 89, the worry I have there is simply there's a very good chance they'll end up tied for the last playoff spot. And if it's with Boston or Minnesota, you lose. Yes. If it's with Houston or Seattle, chances are we'll advance, but it's much more likely it's one of those 2 other teams.
We're proudly brought to you here at Kaufman Corner by our friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete, proudly serving the greater Kansas City area. Gann Asphalt and Concrete is nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Don't risk accidents and liability in your lot. Get your parking lot restriped today. A brightly striped lot will cut down on accidents and keep your parking lot as safe as possible. Kansas City's best is Gann Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lot. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com. All right, Rany, Bobby Witt. Got something on Bobby Witt for today?
I always have something on Bobby Witt. It's, I used to do this with Mike Trout back when he was healthy. I've done it with Shohei Ohtani, where I sort of track their wins above replacement during the season and compare it to the best seasons ever by certain other players or franchises or whatever. And I've been doing it with Bobby Witt. Bobby Witt coming into today was at 8.2 wins above replacement. That would be better than the best season in the history of the Miami Marlins, pitcher or hitter, which is 8.0. It's better than the best season Derek Jeter ever had. Derek Jeter's best season of his career, he was 8.0 wins above replacement. Bobby Witt's at 8.2, and it's August the 18th, Soren. We have 6 weeks left in the season. I put a list here of all the different stats. I mean, literally every single offensive category you think of. The pace Bobby Witt is on for the full season and where he would rank in Royals history. And it's insane. I mean, there's like 2 or 3 categories where he's not in the top 10. Most of them he's in the top 5. Several of them he's leading. For instance, extra base hits. The all-time Royals record for extra base hits is 86 by Al McRae in 1977. That was the year he had 54 doubles. George Brett in 1979 had 85 extra base hits. Bobby Witt's on pace for 93. As a shortstop, he's on pace to obliterate the Royals record for extra base hits. He's on pace to be to score 140 runs. That would be an all-time Royals record. Yep. He's on pace. This one makes me crack up. He's on pace for 119 RBIs, which would be tied for 4th in Royals history as a number 2 hitter on a team where the leadoff hitter, and I'm not making this up, has reached base 3 times all year. Okay, maybe I'm making that up. But he's batting second for a team with no leadoff hitter, and he's on pace for 119 RBIs. Technically, he would actually be 5th because Vinny Pasquantino has 1 RBI more than him. But which is remarkable in its own right. But, in every category, he's on pace for 33 home runs. That would be 9th all time in Royals history. And he's on pace for 10.7 wins above replacement, which would not just break George Brett's record for position players, it would obliterate it by more than a full win. So, I mean, I could go on and on. I'll save some of this for the future, but my God, this is just every day he does something amazing. Today was a relative disappointment. It took him until the 9th inning to get a hit. He was 1 for 4 at the walk. And he had a home run literally robbed over the wall by the center fielder or it would have been just another Bobby Witt day with a home run and a single. What more can you say? You want to talk about the reason my optimism meter is at 7? A big part of it's because Bobby Witt's out there every single day, and that's just terrifying for the opponents.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Vinny Pasquantino, we've had some love in here. Some people saying, hey, we're going to talk about a contract extension for Vinny Pasquantino, which we've talked about where he is age-wise. There's not, because he's older coming up, there's not as much of a necessity to get that done. But I don't think it'd be a bad thing to reward him for the chemistry in the clubhouse and say that, hey, you're our guy, Bobby and you. This is how we roll forward. Salvy's going to, whenever he hangs it up, which might be after next year, then it's your team. These two, you guys, go get it done. And I think also it would make the fans feel good that Bobby Witt's not going to be Mike Sweeney, the guy that's alone out of all of them. Okay, yeah, we are going to keep the whole core of this team together, or at least as much as they can. So I do think that would be something that there are intangibles that go along with signing him. But they actually are. And you talk about the run differential, obviously you have to score some runs. Like there are times like we look at this offense and we go, God, they're just no good. The leadoff hitter can't get on base. There are times the bottom looks inept, but the middle is really good, right? It starts with Bobby Witt, but it's not just Bobby Witt. It's Vinny Pasquantino as well. It's Salvador Perez. I mean, and Vinny has more RBIs than anybody in baseball since the All-Star break. Now, but he hits behind Bobby Witt. That's a big part of it.
Which helps.
That helps a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. So yes, like that is the part where does this look like a lineup that could do damage in a postseason to you or no?
Man, a short series, it's so hard to tell. You know what this lineup looks like to me? It looks like the 1985 Royals to me.
Okay.
Right. And George Brett, but also if you've ever gone back and watched some of those games or look at some of those lineups, we remember George Brett and, Frank White is famous because he was the first second baseman to ever clean up in a World Series game. And people use that as a mark in favor of Frank White. Like he developed into such a fearsome power hitter. And I mean, not to take anything away from Frank White, who, yes, he was a cleanup hitter as a second baseman on a team that won the World Series. But that was as much an indictment of the rest of the lineup as it was praise for Frank White. You had Pat Sheridan, you had Darryl Motley, Buddy Biancalana. Like there was a lot of, not very effective hitters in that lineup, but you had George Brett in the middle of it. And having George Brett there, who hit like George Brett in the playoffs, meant that anybody around him does anything positive, it gets amplified, right? The key to any lineup is to cluster your good hitters together, and the one thing this Royals lineup definitely does is the best hitters are Bobby Witt, Vinny Pasquantino, Salvador Perez, and those guys generally hit 2, 3, 4, every time they're out there. And, Freddie Fermin, I'd like to see Freddie Fermin up in the lineup as much because you want to cluster your good hitters together as because maybe he's, secretly the best leadoff option they have. They've had Michael Massey also at the top of the lineup, but Michael Massey's probably, those are the 5 best hitters right there. The rest of the guys are hit or miss, but they do hit sometimes, right? Like NJ Melendez is exasperated, but he'll run into one. And, so I think as long as Bobby Witt plays like a generational superstar in the playoffs, I think the rest of the lineup will generate enough offense to score runs. And obviously this is a team built around its pitching staff ultimately. So they don't have to score a ton of runs.
Dairon Blanco is what? Well, how would you describe? Is he a guy? Is it just hey, he's actually a nice little piece to have on the team, and every now and then he has a big day because we've seen a couple of big days like this. Not necessarily this is his biggest little 2-day effort, but we've seen him have little spurts where you're like, man, if Dairon Blanco can do that more often, and he can't, I'm starting to think that they're just really good at knowing who he can. Like Quatrero and his team of coaches and Daniel Mack and his stat guys, they need a little more credit for they know right when to play him.
The Royals have done, I think, a very good job of, mixing and matching where he plays. And look, the bench, I'm not saying that Adam Frazier, Garrett Hampson, these guys have been necessarily good all the time, but Quatrero seems to be able to he understands what his bench players do and tries to use them in situations that play to their strengths, whatever their strengths are. Blanco obviously is an elite base stealer, and they've used him in that role all season. but he also can hit lefties a little bit. Like his career OPS against left-handers is 813. He's got a 483 slug career against lefties. Not a huge sample size, but it's not nothing either. He reminds me, honestly, of Paulo Orlando, who, like Blanco, came up at an advanced age, right? Blanco was 29 when he made it to the majors? Yeah, he's 31 now. But Orlando was the same way. That's very unusual. It's a little less unusual maybe in 2024 than it was 30 years ago, but it's still pretty rare for a guy to make it to the majors that late in his career. And the thing about those guys is, how grateful they are to be there. Like, they've worked so hard to get the opportunity that it seems to me very unlikely that Blanco's the kind of guy who's going to be bitter or angry because he's not playing every day. Like, he's happy to be in the major leagues. He's happy to be drawing a major league paycheck, getting major league benefits, and contributing on a good team. And he knows what he can do. He knows what he's capable of. And so I think playing him against lefties, maybe not all the time, but MJ Melendez is almost, I don't think MJ has been, they rarely play MJ against lefties at all. So it's like he's in a good situation where the starting left fielder against right-handed pitching doesn't start against left-handed pitching. So Blanco is that guy. Sometimes they'll use Garrett Hampson out there. But if it's me, at this point, they didn't make a trade for an outfielder at the deadline. I'm more than comfortable with letting Dairon Blanco play left field against lefties. His defense is fine. I don't know if he's elite, but with that speed is certainly not bad. He'll obviously contribute on the base paths, and he can run into them. He can run into a ball. Ran into 3 in the last 2 days. Probably not a coincidence it was in Cincinnati, which is a great home run park. But, I mean, he didn't hit entirely cheapies either. So I think he's a valuable guy, both because he has a defined role. He has multiple roles. He can play against lefties, but he can also pinch run. And he's, he understands his role and he's accepted it. You need guys like that to win in the playoffs. I mean, like I said, Paulo Orlando was on that 2015 Royals team, and Dairon Blanco fits that role, but with the added benefit of also being the Terrence Gore of this team. He kind of combines those two into one.
Yeah, no, and listen, if they can just have, that's what your bottom of your lineup does. It doesn't go out there necessarily and just bomb away, but if you can have a couple of moments, that's all you need when you've got, like you said, a George Brett caliber player up in the middle in the heart of the lineup. I listen, it is a sneaky little lineup, and they're doing a great job of how they mix them in, right? I mean, did you really think we'd be sitting here and be looking at MJ Melendez with a slash line of 205, 265, 407? And like it's gone. Like, if we'd have said the Royals record is going to be what it is, what it is right now work back and tell me how we got here.
Right.
You know what I'd tell you? MJ Melendez hit 37 home runs and became the slugging left fielder that everybody was hoping he would be. That I would have told you that's how they got here. Not the way it's ended up looking right now.
Yeah, I would have probably said the same thing, and I think we both would have said Maikel Garcia would have broken out. And had much better numbers too. It's it's a funny sport. That the thing about Bobby Witt, though, is that not even in our wildest dreams would I have predicted the numbers he put. Like, if I told you, Bobby Witt is going to be hitting 350 with 35 doubles, 11 triples, 25 home runs, like, you would have stopped me halfway and be like, Rany, like, don't be ridiculous. Let's stay in the land of reason here. And his numbers are so off the charts that he basically makes up for like 2 other players not having the breakout seasons that we expected from them.
I want to real quick mention Brady Singer before we get to your speech. Everybody is now is calling for.
You're hyping it up, man. Uh-oh.
Yeah. What is Brady Singer like? Like, can we? Again, because the Reds, I feel bad for him because this goes down as another sub 500 team. So, of course, he deals against sub 500 teams. The Reds, it would be nice if they would climb back above 500 before this year is over to help change those numbers around for him. But he does just kind of continue to be this little riddle of good teams slap him and bad teams don't.
Yeah, I feel like we have this discussion at least once a month. What is Brady Singer? We don't know. I think, we have to just accept that what he is a quality number 3 starter who, if nothing else, will give you innings generally, throws strikes, keeps you in games, and then flashes better than that, right? And that's the thing I think that's so tantalizing and so frustrating, is that he shows at times the ability to be something more than that. And I've reached the point where it's like if he does that for an extended period of time, he turns into the guy that he flashes. Wonderful, but I've learned to accept that who he is fine. He's a good pitcher. He's just not a great pitcher, right? He has some limitations in the terms of obviously his repertoire, which we've talked about many times, and that probably makes him more susceptible to the quality of the opponent than most pitchers, right? The fact, you talk about like his performance against bad teams, he declines more than most pitchers do based on the quality of the opponent. That doesn't reveal some sort of like character flaw in him. It just reveals the limitations of his repertoire. But his strengths, his ability to locate, and his ability to mix and match two really, really good pitches makes him able to dominate against less experienced, less talented opponents. But in a 162 game season, that's okay, because you know what? You're going to play bad teams. You're going to play average teams, and he can beat up on those guys. And that's great. That's still a valuable skill. I mean, he came into today 10th in the league in ERA, and that's probably better now after 6 shutout innings. Like that, let's not look a gift horse in the mouth. He's a good pitcher. He's just not a great one.
Yeah, if you clinch the playoffs with 5 games left, okay, set your 1, 2, 3 for the wild card. What are you running out there right now?
It's interesting because we actually I had this discussion with some followers on Twitter today. I think Reagan's to me is the clear one. I mean, whatever Lugo's numbers are, Reagan's to me is the clear one for 2 reasons. One, he's the best pitcher, but secondly, your number one starter. We're talking about a wild card round here. It's 3 games in 3 days. There's no off days, if I recall correctly. So the number one starter could come back in game 3 if the season's on the line. You need 1 inning. Keep that in mind. Would I rather have Reagan's coming out of the bullpen to protect a 1-run lead in the 10th inning against the Yankees at Yankee Stadium, or Seth Lugo? I won't call Reagan's available. I'm assuming the game 2 starter is out. The game 1 starter could give you an inning. So that one's easy. To me, it's Reagan's game 1. I think Lugo in 2 is pretty obvious, even though, maybe he's not quite as good as he's shown. And we'll see if he wears down the rest of the season, that could change. But I think Lugo is clearly your number 2. So the question is it Michael Wacha or is it Brady Singer in game 3? And I think I go with Michael Wacha for 2 reasons. One is the worst case scenario in a winner take all, because that's what that is, right? It's a winner take all game 3, is your starter just doesn't have it and things unravel quickly and he gives up 6 runs before you have a chance to get a guy up in the bullpen fully warm or whatever. Like the blow up potential with Singer, I think, is a little bit higher than Wacha. I think his ceiling is higher, but his floor is lower. That worries me. But the other reason is I actually think whoever doesn't start is going to be in the bullpen. And I think Brady Singer in the bullpen for even one playoff series is a much more valuable weapon than Michael Wacha would be. So, this is something, obviously, the Royals will have to manage the egos of guys. But look, you'll only start 3 guys, and the Royals have 4 incredibly good starters this year. Somebody has to take the short end of the stick. It's only for 1 series. You reassure the guy, you'll be, let's win this round so you can start in the ALDS. And I think you can make Singer into a multi-inning weapon, especially because with that slider, he's so effective against right-handed batters. Whereas Wacha, has a more balanced platoon split. I'm not really sure. I mean, he'd be fine in a role, but you can't mix and match him as well as you can with Singer. So I would start Wacha and put Singer in the bullpen.
All right, Rany. You have reviewed the squad and you're ready to make what shall we say, an admission?
Soren. I've been working on this on this mea culpa for a month or 2 now. I think this is as good a time as any to say to get some things off my chest. So okay. If you want, go ahead and make yourself a cup of coffee. Use the men's room. This might take a while. I'm going to be getting a lot off my chest here. So,
all right.
But thank you for ceding the floor to me.
Sure.
10 years ago this month, I wrote my first ever column for the Kansas City Star. Believe it or not, the 2014 Royals were not always destined to play in the World Series and be one of the most popular teams in franchise history. At one time, they were considered a massive disappointment. That time happened to coincide with the time the Star asked me to write about them. On the morning of June 5th, when my column was published, the Royals were under 500, in last place in the American League Central, and the fan base was demanding blood. I would like to tell you, in light of what was to come, that my column was a calming voice in the storm, that I stood by the organization, that I advocated patience, that I was there to reassure the fans that everything was going according to plan. But if you think that's what I did, you don't know me very well. I may or may not have written the following line. Quote, "For years, the front office has moved the goalposts and offered excuses for the glacial pace of the rebuilding process, but it's time to hold them accountable," unquote. I chose my words carefully, and I did not explicitly call for the GM to be fired. I left myself an out when I concluded, quote, "Moore deserves a little more time to turn the season around. If the team goes on a stretch where it wins 15 out of 20, as the Royals did last year, they might lead the wildcard race and quiet their critics. But that time should be measured in weeks, not years," unquote. Did I say weeks? I should have said days. The column ran on June 5th. On June 7th, the Royals began a 10-game winning streak, their longest in 20 years. They didn't just win 15 of 20, they won 15 of 19. They didn't lead the wildcard race, they led the division. They would follow up that streak by losing 18 of 27 to fall back under 500, but then Sung Woo landed at KCI, the Royals caught fire in the second half, and when they won on the final Friday of the season on a gorgeous night here in Chicago, they had clinched their first playoff spot in 29 years. The morning of the wild card game, I wrote my second, and to this date, final column for the Kansas City Star. The title of that column was "Rany Jazayerli was critical of Royals then, not so much now," which sums it up pretty nicely. After reviewing the impact of the Will Myers trade, I finished with the words, quote, "Even a former critic like myself has to acknowledge that the trade has worked exactly the way the Royals expected it to. Dayton Moore was right. I was wrong. I'll have to console myself this evening from the stands at Kauffman Stadium," unquote. Dayton Moore was right. I was wrong. If you think that was easy for me to write, you also don't know me very well. But it was true, and I always try to bear witness to the truth, even if the truth is pointing its fingers directly at me. Evidently, time is a flat circle, and we've come back around to the same point again. I have had a lot of opinions about the Royals, and I stand by them in their totality, even if they are not perfect, because no one is perfect. But apparently, the rules are that once a decade, I get something truly, deeply, you might even say perfectly wrong. I got something so hilariously wrong that I feel compelled to issue a public apology. 14 months ago, the Royals were well on their way to not only the worst season in their history, but one of the worst seasons in Major League history. They had been 18-41 when we had taped the previous Sunday's edition of Kauffman Corner. But when you and I reconvened for episode 65, on the night of June 11th, the Royals had lost all 6 games that week to fall to 18-47. They hadn't just lost, they had gotten obliterated. 4 of their 6 losses were by at least 5 runs. In the 6th year of a rebuilding project, they were one of the worst teams in baseball with one of the worst farm systems in baseball. And so, let's be frank, I snapped. When we opened episode 65 that Sunday night, you graciously cleared the floor and allowed me to perform a monologue. This was my first mistake, because as anyone who has watched an action film knows, you never want to be the guy who gives a monologue. And as proof that I don't learn from my mistakes, I'm monologuing again right now. The thesis of my Rany rant that night can be summed up in the 4 words I repeated over and over. Burn it all down. After analyzing from every angle just how badly the Royals had played, and just how poorly their farm system had ranked, and just how disappointing their first-round draft picks had been, I emptied both barrels until I was out of ammo. As I had done a decade prior, I was careful not to explicitly call for the firing of specific people. But a selection of quotes from that rant will give you an idea as to what I was hinting at. There was this quote, "And I'm pissed off, but I'm mainly pissed off at myself for talking myself into believing that one man was so responsible for the embarrassment that the Royals had become last season that firing him, along with the manager and pitching coach, was sufficient to turn things around." But also this quote, "Dayton Moore is gone, and maybe he took all the bad with him. Maybe the man who was an assistant GM for 15 years was completely blameless." And finally, there is this one. "It may be time to repeat the circle of life and start over yet again. I do not mean that John Sherman should repeat what David Glass did in 2006 and fire his GM 1 week before the draft. His front office made this bed. They ought to sleep in it, at least through the trading deadline. But if I'm John Sherman, I'm looking for alternatives now. Unquote. Did I say the words, fire JJ Picollo? No, I didn't even say his name. I believe this is what they call, in the political world, plausible deniability. But I think a careful reading of my words will lead you to the conclusion that when I said burn it all down, I was not calling for the Royals to fire the strength and conditioning coach of the Class A Columbia Fireflies. The Royals did not burn it all down. They stayed the course. And for a while, at least, they did not change course. They continued to lose at a historic pace for another 3 months, going 26-54 through the middle of September, falling to 44-101, the most games under 500 of any team in Royals history, which is saying a lot. But starting on September 12th, 2 years to the day after Picollo was promoted to general manager, and just shy of 1 year after Dayton Moore was fired and Picollo added executive vice president to his title, the Royals did a 180. They finished last year on a 12-5 stretch, miraculously keeping them from breaking the franchise record for losses. And as I speak, they are 69-55, in position to make the playoffs with 6 weeks left in the season. They have gone 81-60 in their last 141 games, which is the most games they have won in any 141-game stretch since they jumped into a dogpile at the end of the 2015 World Series. They have a run differential of plus 109, which is the best run differential they have had at any single moment since 1980. They are poised to accomplish something absolutely unprecedented in the history of baseball, from 106 losses to the postseason in a single year. So I think it is safe to say, and not for the last time in this rambling speech, that when I said it was time to burn it all down, that when I even implied that the Kansas City Royals would be better off if they started looking for a new general manager, I was wrong. In my defense, I think it is important to understand where I was coming from. It wasn't simply that the Royals in the 6th year of their rebuild were hurtling towards the worst season ever, or even that they were doing this while simultaneously having the worst farm system in baseball. Even if they had hired the savviest GM in the game from outside the organization the previous September, that GM would have sensibly looked upon the wreckage of the 2022 Royals and conclude that the only way around the wreckage was to go through it. That, like Jeff Lunau concluded with the Astros or Theo Epstein with the Cubs, the organization had to get worse before it could get better. So it wasn't simply their record on the field that had driven me to the brink of despair just 9 months into JJ Picollo's tenure, before he had overseen a single draft or trade deadline. It was that the signature move of his time as GM to that point, the only multi-year free agent contract he had inked during his first offseason, was the signing of Jordan Lyles. It's perhaps for the best I was on vacation the week the Royals released Lyles, and I don't want to start another argument now. I just want to say that when I flipped my lid, Lyles was on pace for one of the worst seasons by a starting pitcher in Major League history. He had a 6.84 ERA and would finish with a 6.28 ERA, the highest ERA by any qualifying pitcher in 17 years. And the Royals had lost all 13 starts he had made, a streak which would reach 15, the longest stretch of losing starts to begin a season by any pitcher in modern Major League history. So it wasn't just that the Royals were on pace for their worst season ever, but that the player most responsible for the record was one of the few players on the roster that Dayton Moore had nothing to do with. Today, with the benefit of hindsight, I can see that while the Jordan Lyles contract was every bit the mistake that I thought it would be, it was also an anomaly. In the moment, that transaction towered over a 9-month tenure as general manager. Today, with JJ approaching his 2nd anniversary in charge of the Royals and with nothing else remotely resembling the Lyles contract on his resume, it is easier to put into perspective as just a brain fart, a panicky and pointless move that sticks out like a sore thumb on the landscape of his overall tenure, but not as the defining decision of JJ's term as GM that proved he was no different than the man he replaced and whom he had served under for 17 years. And that's the other mistake that I made when I prematurely condemned the job that JJ had done as GM. I tied him too much to the sins of his predecessor. Because while it is true that Dayton Moore led the Royals to 2 pennants and a world championship, and he will always deserve to be celebrated for that, by the end of his tenure, the Royals had fallen back to the same abject state that he had found them in when he was hired in 2006. 2 American League teams in the last 60 years have finished dead last in runs allowed, home runs allowed, hits allowed, walks allowed, and strikeouts. The first was the 2006 Royals, who got Dayton hired. The second was the 2022 Royals, who got Dayton fired. JJ was in the front office from beginning to end, and I thought it reasonable to conclude that the man who was number 2 in command when the Royals lost 104 games in 2018, 103 games in 2019, and were on their way to losing 97 games in 2022 when he was hired, bore at least some of the blame. I thought that if he had intended to show us a radically different approach than the man he replaced, a radically different approach the Royals desperately needed, that having his voice in the room for all those years would have already led to a different approach being manifested. That was a poor assumption on my part. For one thing, while JJ was Dayton's right-hand man at the end, that was not the only job he held in the Royals front office. JJ was hired in 2006 as Director of Player Development, and from 2008 to 2015, he held the title of Assistant GM in charge of Scouting and Player Development, a tenure which coincided with the Royals developing the core of players who would win 2 pennants and a championship. The 2011 Royals, the one that placed 8 prospects in Baseball America's top 100, while being hailed as possibly the greatest farm system of all time, happened in the middle of his watch. Perhaps it wasn't a coincidence that his promotion in 2016, taking his full-time focus away from the farm system, was followed by a withering of said farm system. And let's not forget, it was JJ who pushed to overhaul some of the minor league development processes after the 2019 season, which led to the hiring of people like Alex Zumwalt and Drew Saylor and the resurrection of MJ Melendez from non-prospect to minor league home run leader. But the other flaw in my assumption was that I overestimated his power as a number 2, and I underestimated the changes he would make as a number 1. And there have been changes. I want to propose a hypothetical to you now, an alternate universe in which, instead of promoting JJ Picollo to the top job when he fired Dayton Moore on September 21st, 2022, John Sherman had hired a brilliant, analytically savvy wonderkind with a sterling national reputation away from, let us say, the Dodgers, the organization at the forefront of cutting-edge baseball thought. Let's give this brilliant GM prospect the completely fictional name of Theo Friedman Bean. And let's imagine that after becoming the Royals' new general manager, Theo Friedman Bean did the following. That just 2 weeks after getting the job, and just hours after the final game of the season, he fired Mike Matheny and Cal Eldred, who Dayton Moore had kept as manager and pitching coach for years. That after a thorough search for a new manager and pitching coach that took longer than you and I expected, Theo Friedman Bean skipped over the well-liked internal candidate, Pedro Grafal, and hired as his new manager the largely unknown but well-respected Rays bench coach, Matt Quatrero, and hired as his new pitching coach the Guardians bullpen coach, Brian Sweeney. He also hired Zach Bowe from the Twins as an assistant pitching coach, something the Royals never had before, and some guy even the most hardcore baseball fans had never heard of, Jose Alguacil, as their infield coach. That in his first offseason as general manager, Theo Friedman Bean took a chance on a veteran player with prodigious tools, but also multiple red flags. And on a very modest 1-year contract, Aroldis Chapman immediately regained his historic fastball and became the most coveted left-handed reliever on the market. That in the same offseason, Theo Friedman Bean took a look at one of the most talented and exasperating players the Royals have ever developed, Adalberto Mondesi, and had no qualms about flat-out giving him away, trading him away for a reliever who had missed the entire previous season. While it's hard to say the Royals won the trade, Josh Taylor has thrown 18 innings and allowed 17 runs last year and hasn't pitched in over a year. He was absolutely right to think that Mondesi was as good as done. Mondesi tore his ACL on April 26, 2022, and he has not appeared in a professional game, not major league game, professional game, in the 28 months since. That after his most valuable property, Bobby Witt Jr., had shuttled between third base and shortstop as a rookie while putting up bad defensive numbers everywhere, Theo Friedman Bean had committed to him as the team's everyday shortstop. And with the help and tutelage of Alguacil, Witt made tremendous defensive strides as a sophomore and became one of the best defensive players in the sport almost overnight. That after his predecessor insisted that MJ Melendez was a catcher, while simultaneously refusing to trade him even though he also had Salvador Perez, it took Theo Friedman Bean barely 1 month to pull the plug on that experiment. Melendez put on a catcher's mask for the last time on April 30th last year and has been a corner outfielder ever since. That in early May, Theo Friedman Bean picked a peculiar time of year to make a peculiar kind of trade. He traded a prospect in rookie ball for a AAA pitcher who had already been designated for assignment. But just 4 months later, James MacArthur would be closing for the Royals while having one of the greatest Septembers of any Royals pitcher ever. And while he's had an up and down 2024, he remains a core member of the Royals' long-term bullpen. That rather than wait until the last moment to trade Chapman for prospects, Theo Friedman Bean found a talent package he liked a month before the trading deadline And rather than demand a top prospect, he accepted that the key player in the deal would be a 25-year-old quadruple A player who had already exhausted his rookie status, a guy by the name of Cole Ragans. That he gave Cole Ragans to his newly upgraded pitching development team in Omaha. And within a month, they had taught Ragans a new slider and sent him back to Kansas City on August 2nd of last year. And from that exact moment until today, Ragans has been, without hyperbole, one of the 5 best pitchers in the world. That he was exceptionally busy right up until the last minute before the trading deadline, unloading Mickey Lopez and Jose Cuas and Ryan Yarbrough and Scott Barlow. And while not all of those trades brought back useful talent, some of them did. Nelson Velasquez alone was more valuable than all the guys the Royals traded away, and demonstrated a level of transactionality that Dayton Moore often aspired to, but rarely accomplished. That after being on pace to finish with one of the 5 worst records in the American League history, and despite trading some of their best players away at the deadline, the Royals stabilized, finishing the season on a 27-31 run. That after not making changes to his scouting department in his first offseason, Theo Friedman Bean hired the highly regarded Brian Bridges as his new scouting director last September, and Bridges' first draft this July was given high marks by most draft experts. That he went into the offseason this past winter determined to sign 2 veteran starting pitchers to his rotation. And he landed upon a 34-year-old who had been a reliever most of his career and had just run a career high of 146 innings, along with a 32-year-old pitcher who had battled injuries for much of the past 6 years and hadn't thrown even 135 innings in a season since 2017. And oh yeah, neither pitcher has above-average velocity and relies heavily on their off-speed stuff. Those 2 guys are, of course, Seth Lugo, who made the All-Star game and already looks like one of the best free agent signings in franchise history, and Michael Wacha, who quietly has his ERA down to 3.33. The Royals' 4 qualifying starting pitchers, Lugo, Ragans, Brady Singer, and Wacha, all rank in the top 11 in the American League in ERA right now, which is even more impressive than it sounds because Kauffman Stadium is actually a good hitter's park. By adjusted ERA, which accounts for ballpark effects, that foursome ranks 3rd, 5th, 6th, and 7th in the league among qualifying starters. In a single offseason, the Royals have gone from 14th in the league in runs allowed to 3rd. That Theo Friedman Bean showed a willingness to move on from mistakes quickly. Hunter Dozier was under contract for 2023 and 2024. But after less than 100 plate appearances last year, he was released in mid-May. Mistakes of his own making, like Jackie Bradley Jr. or Franmil Reyes, or even, yes, Jordan Lyles, were let go. Even players who demonstrated some ability, like Edward Olivares, or some future promise, like Jackson Kowar, or some history of recent success, like Josh Stillmont or Dylan Coleman, were sent packing. That before this season, Theo Friedman Bean accomplished his most important task of all, convincing Bobby Witt Jr., his family, and his agency that the Royals were worth making a long-term commitment to, while convincing John Sherman and the ownership group that Bobby Witt Jr. was worth investing in to the tune of $250 million. If nothing else, I think you and I are done discussing whether the Royals should trade Jr. for a long, long time. And that, at this year's trade deadline, Theo Friedman Bean had to switch tracks entirely and operate as a buyer, and did so in a shrewd and opportunistic manner. His first trade for Hunter Harvey may have immediately gone sour, but rather than get gun-shy, he doubled down, trading for another right-handed reliever in Lucas Erceg, who in 3 weeks has become the savior of the bullpen. Michael Lorenzen has been a perfectly cromulent 5th starter, and Paul DeYoung is making a strong case to be the everyday third baseman so far, and both were acquired at minimal expense. The Royals that took the field in Cincinnati this weekend, with the reinforcements acquired at the deadline, with MacArthur returning to form, with Chris Bubich back from Tommy John surgery, with even Melendez and Hunter Renfroe doing a reasonable impression of everyday outfielders, is the deepest and best roster they have had all season. Not coincidentally, the Royals played about as perfect a series of baseball as it is possible to play, outscoring the Reds by a combined score of 28-3. And it's still reasonable to hope that Hunter Harvey's back heals up, or that Alec Marsh returns when rosters expand on September 1st as a secret weapon in the bullpen. If Theo Friedman Bean, analytics wonderkin hired away from the Los Angeles Dodgers, had accomplished all these things, what would we be saying about him today? If Theo Friedman Bean was presiding over a team on pace to win 90 games and improve its record by 34 games in 1 year, which would be the second largest season-over-season improvement in modern Major League history, wouldn't we already be lobbying for him to be inducted into the Royals Hall of Fame? If after being told by Dayton Moore that rebuilding projects take 5 to 7 years and that it takes 1,500 at-bats to properly evaluate a prospect, Theo Friedman Bean had built the Royals into a winning ball club in his second season, and Bobby Witt had needed fewer than 1,200 at-bats to turn into an MVP candidate, Wouldn't we already be interviewing contractors and soliciting architects' designs for the statue we'd be building for him? The punchline, of course, is that everything I just described has actually happened. But it wasn't Theo Friedman Bean who made it happen. It was JJ Picollo. It is JJ Picollo, who is a favorite to be the first Royals executive to win Executive of the Year honors since John Schuerholz in 1985. It is JJ Picollo who has fully emerged from the shadow of Dayton Moore to accomplish in 23 months what it took Moore 7 years to accomplish, to put a Royals free team on the field that has legitimate playoff expectations in mid-August. It is JJ Picollo who has made me eat my words and admit, once again, I was wrong. It's not that JJ has been perfect, because he has not been perfect, just like no GM is perfect. He let Brent Rooker go, and my God, how good would this team look with Rooker in a corner outfield spot? But we should at least acknowledge that the Royals had just acquired Rooker 3 months earlier for backup catcher Cam Gallagher, who literally never appeared in a game for the Padres. The Royals never did figure out Ryan O'Hearn, who was remade by the Orioles into a valuable player, and they never did figure out Colin Snyder, who may be doing the same thing with the Mariners now. But mistakes are part of the job, and they are absolutely part of the transactional game. For so many years, it was the fear of making a mistake, of letting a player go who would emerge as a star somewhere else, that was holding the Royals back from doing what needed to be done. JJ has made mistakes and will continue to make mistakes because that is part of the job. And I am not prepared to go so far and tell you that he is a great GM or even a good GM for the same reason that I shouldn't have lost my patience with him a year ago. That, as you, Soren, wisely tried to tell me, 1 year or even 2 years is simply not enough time to properly evaluate a general manager. JJ's first year on the job was spotty and erratic. His second year on the job is shaping up to be historic, maybe Homeric, the kind that you write odes for. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. We simply need to give him more time to prove himself. And I was wrong to not give him more time in the first place. I was wrong to assume that the JJ Picollo era was just going to be a continuation of the Dayton Moore era in Kansas City. I was wrong to think that JJ was not going to be his own man, that he was not going to bring fresh ideas and a new approach to the job. I was wrong to think that 9 months was enough time to condemn his work on the job. JJ deserves to be evaluated on his own merits, and he definitely merits more time on the job, possibly a contract extension soon, and who knows, maybe his own portrait in the Royals Hall of Fame someday. We just don't know yet. But I look forward to discussing, complimenting, and yes, criticizing his decisions as general manager of the Royals with you for years to come. JJ Picollo has earned his job, Soren, for now and for some time to come. I was wrong. And I hope that, like I did a decade ago, I will get to console myself one evening this October from the stands at Kauffman Stadium.
Yeah. Well said. Well done, Rany. I mean, it is. I think, look, you covered it really well there. All the different things that he's obviously done that are positives, but the reasons why people were frustrated. I mean, there was real reasons to be frustrated, and I'll throw some love towards John Sherman for it was not an easy or popular choice. Yet he saw something in JJ Picollo that made him think, okay, he will get this done, and and he stood by the guy, because it would have been easy to be like, okay, I missed on this one, and now it is, and it is. And I like what you said about, it's not a 5 to 7 year rebuild, right? How quickly he turned it around. And I think that's one of the things that I think is amazing, that if you are going to be a GM for quite some time and going to be successful, then you need to do things other people haven't done, right? I'm not saying every turnaround should be that quick, but it does speak to, he has knocked off a lot of things real fast in a lot of different ways. And transactional isn't just a trade. Transactional isn't just, and it's not just trades. It's free agent signings. It's everything else. And
it's hiring people to help coach these guys up and develop players, et cetera. And, it's funny because, for years when the Royals were rebuilding, even when the rebuild worked out wonderfully in 2014, 2015, the length of time it took, we always talked about, why does it always take the Royals 7 years? Why is it supposed to take 7 years when other teams, we could point at so many other teams that in 3 years turned it around or whatever. And so it's so refreshing and kind of justifies maybe our skepticism that it shouldn't have to take this long. That the situation JJ fell into 2 years ago looked about as hopeless as the situation that Dayton and JJ and all these guys who came over from Atlanta were facing in 06. And they haven't fixed everything. I mean, the farm system is better, but it's still not good. But that didn't hold them back. Like there are ways to improve your team without simply using your minor league system, right? That was the thing I think that distinguishes this rebuild from the 2006 rebuild, which was they brought in Gilmesh and but they also signed Jose Guillen, and a lot of the free agent dollars were not spent wisely, and they probably didn't trade their way to success like JJ has. And it took 7 years. It's been 2 years. Yeah, maybe there's been some luck involved, but this is, they were active. He actively tried to improve this team. And, when everything goes your way for 1 year, this is what can happen.
Yeah, I don't like luck. You know that. I think they earned 56 wins and 106 losses, and they're earning all this here.
Yeah,
right?
And more power to them.
And listen, let me say a little bit, like a lot of these guys were Dayton Moore draft picks.
Yeah, no,
Brady
absolutely.
Singer was a Dayton Moore draft pick. Vinny Pasquantino was a Dayton Moore draft pick.
Course.
Bobby Witt Jr. So, and listen, I was, Dayton Moore said, well, they've got the good core and the good nucleus here. Like he said that this past off season. And I was like, what? What core, what nucleus do you think is there? It was like, are you not watching what's going on? And so they did more things right during the time that it was awful than it appeared. They were building a core. And to your point, I think JJ Picollo did have a lot to do with that.
No, absolutely. And I don't want this to be necessarily, I'm not denigrating what happened to Dayton Moore. Dayton Moore, it was his time to go. But at the same time, I mean, look, the man will be in the World Hall of Fame and deserves it. Yes. He won a World Series. It's not, and you're absolutely right that there was maybe more talent here. My hope, and the reason why last year caught us off guard as much as this year has in a way, was that I thought that wave of talent, not just Witt, but Pasquantino, Michael Massey, Nick Prado, okay, and MJ Melendez, I thought that there was a core there. And there was a little bit of a core. There was Bobby Witt, and then there was Pasquantino, and then some role guys, Michael Garcia, and some of these other players. But the star, you aside from Witt, you didn't have the star potential, and you didn't have the pitching. And that's what really is the miracle here. If you talk about just having one incredible year, is the overhaul of the rotation, improvement from within, from Michael Walk, from Alec Marsh, and then obviously Brady Singer, having one of his good years, but staying healthy and pitching to his potential. 2 incredible free agent signings and one of the best trades in modern, Royals, if not modern, Major League history, getting Cole Reagans. That's the difference between, without that, this team would be better and be feisty and maybe win 72 games. And people are like, well, they don't suck anymore, but they would not be in the playoffs. So, I was wrong. JJ Picollo, has probably deserved the job in the first place and certainly deserves it now. And, 9 months was way too short a time to evaluate him. And I'm happy he's here, and I'm looking forward to, continuing to criticize and critique his moves, but also compliment him and cheer for this team. Hopefully, in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, and I think to your point, we know there'll be more moves, right? The transactional, he is transactional, and so there will be things for us to talk about. I can't wait for the next offseason to see how they make this team better when they get there. By the way, the weather's going to be turning cold here before long. Weekends are booking up fast. Get your seal coating signed up for now with Gann Asphalt and Concrete with free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews. Every project comes with a written warranty with Gann. Gann Asphalt keeps your parking lot safer, helps you and your business avoid unnecessary delays and costly expenses. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com. or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Rany, well done. That was incredibly well written, as you are very good at doing and expertly delivered as well. So nice work, buddy.
I'm glad to get that off my chest. My therapist tells me that I'll feel much better now. So
it's good stuff. It's good stuff. So for the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli, I'm Soren Petro, saying thank you very much for joining us here on Kaufman.